Hey, what's up guys? In this video, I'm going to be going over the Redux effect in Ableton Live, as well as I'm going to be offering you a primer to understand bit depths and sample rates. So Redux is a sample rate and bit depth reducer. That's what it means, Redux. And it achieves that with something called sample and hold and some truncation using math. I don't want to get too much into that, but yeah, what it does is it kind of rounds things down. It's a digital audio quality reducer. Why would you want that? Well, these old school machines, digital samplers, did not have the best quality. So they would have something called dirt. You would have the bit depth kind of adding a little bit of noise to the samples, and they would combat that with filtering, and that would create like a dirtier, darker sample. This is done a lot, like in the Akai and a whole bunch of other things. The sample rates and bit rates were not as ideal as they were. So let's look at sample rates so we can understand what's going on here. So we're looking at a sine wave here in an oscilloscope in the time domain. Go dot samples, and I'll just turn off the sample interpolation. And now we're looking at dots. Look at these dots. So each one of these dots is a sample, right? And they are evenly spaced out. So, sine wave comes in, or a sine wave wants to be recreated in the digital realm. There's no continuous signals in the digital realm, right? That's not how it works. What it does is every so often, a specified amount of time, it will take a sample. Be like, oh, here, how loud is it? Or, what's the value here? And that's sampling. Sampling is done all over the place, right? So we'll look at, this sample here. It'll say that it's, some value, this sample here, some value, and it goes along. And the speed that it goes is at the sampling rate. Okay, so yeah, let's just do sample rates. Sample rates. Okay, so right now I am working in something called 44.1K. And that is 44,100 hertz, right? And this means that every second it will take a sample, and it will do that. Every second we have the ability to plot a sample 44,100 times. So if I had a synth and I was recording a sound, it would every second sample 44,100 points, right? And this is the point of, like how loud things are. And we'll get into the bit depth in a second. This is the standard for music or CD, right? And it's very important because in music, the standard for distribution and iTunes and all that sort of fun stuff is 44,100K 16 bits. And bits are a little bit different here. Let's go into bits. So there's the bit depth, and that is expressed as, a number, 16 bit. So 44.1, 16 bit. You'll see these combinations floating around. So the sample rate is how many times it will be able to sample the amplitude to a 16-bit kind of resolution, right? And 16-bit is pretty good. It's the resolution of the where this point can fall is the bit depth resolution, right? And the sample rate is how far apart these points in time are. So I hope that makes sense there. And this would be expressed in a value, right? So at this point, it would be a value of a bunch of zeros and all those sort of fun things. And then this is essentially plotted like so, and then reconstructed with filtering, and there you have it. So there is the sample rate. We're going to start with sample rate first. There's a number of different kinds of sample rates. There's also DVD sample rates, and this is kind of another standard that you might be working with because it's very important. The 44.1 versus the 48K, which is 48,000 hertz. Right, that's 48,000 times per second. And it's not better because it's a higher resolution. It's above the Nyquist frequency of 20K. It's double, right? We'll get into that maybe in a later video. It's better because it works with something called 30 and 24 FPS video, right? And if you use a CD 44K wave file or audio file for a film, or if you're editing, it's not going to work. It's going to desynchronize because the numbers, it has a hard time kind of adding things up, because 30 FPS is actually, I think it's 29.97, and then 24 is actually 23.8 something, right? They're not exactly on point. And, you know, I don't know how it works is 48K is the standard for DVD video, and even the default Windows and Mac OS settings are all set to 48K. YouTube is 48K. Everything wants to be 48K. So just keep that in mind. But for music making, use whatever the operating system that you're using wants to use. I have mine set to 44.1 because that's kind of what I do. If yours is set to 48K, don't worry about it. And that would be the sample rate portion. So let's look at what reducing the sample rate will do. If you increase the sample rate, you won't, depending on what's going on, you won't get like a higher resolution, I guess. Well, maybe you might, but it's hard to kind of wrap your head around. I need to actually show you. So I'm going to drag in Redux, and I have a sine wave playing, and I'm just going to do something called downsampling. This will reduce the sample rate. So what this is actually doing is it is reducing how many samples that you have, and then kind of giving you somewhat of a stair step, right? And you can't really hear it, but you can see it. And this is, just ignore these sample points. What the Redux is actually doing is it's reducing those sample points and adding some truncation in time, right? So these are actually, you know, kind of stair-steppy, right? There's no kind of filtering going on, and this is essentially giving us something called aliasing. It's giving us this stair-step kind of pattern, and yeah, it's just a really cool effect. Let's add some more stuff in there. Right, we're getting more of an intensity of the stair step, and this is not a transfer function because this is actually moving along, and the harmonics will travel up and down the keyboard depending on what note you're pressing. Right, check that out. And the spectrum. Right, so this is kind of, I guess, aliasing. Right? And this is when, you know, digital gear was kind of terrible, right? So as we move, this fundamental will move, but the actual harmonics will not travel up as we move, right? And that's the difference between harmonics and these aliasing effects. Let's increase this more. right? We're getting more of a stair step. It's becoming more and more extreme. And as we move up the keyboard in pitch, right, the pitch cannot be recreated because the pitch is traveling actually faster than the samples can keep up. And this is why we have audio in 44.1 or 48K. It's double the frequency that we can hear and then some. So 20 hertz to 20,000 hertz. So let's say, right, the maximum that we want to create would be 20,000 hertz, right? And in order to recreate that according to the Nyquist theorem, it's essentially, double that frequency, right? So that would be 40,000 hertz. And, for some reason or another, when the standard was applied for CD, they just said, okay, 44.1. And I don't know why that was chosen, but it was the added benefit of giving some headroom. And I don't know, apparently people don't like the standard. Apparently it's pretty good. I don't know, but that's essentially what. So for every kind of frequency, the maximum frequency that you want to reproduce, so 20K, you have to have a sampling rate double of that at least. And that's pretty accurate, and you will get a little bit of bounce back, but that's why we have this headroom and some really interesting filters and something called oversampling, which is a topic for another video. So I hope that is clear. So we can go even more extreme, right? There's a soft downsample, and then there's a hard sample. And we can hard sample those all the way to essentially decimation, where these samples are so far apart, it can't recreate anything. Right, this might get a little bit abrasive. Right, those samples are so far apart, it can't even reconstruct what's going on. And as I change up and down the keyboard, right, we're getting different kind of landing points for that sample rate. It's really intense. So, right, it's saying, okay, each one of these is a sample point. No, actually, this sample point, and then this sample point, and it just truncates it, right? It doesn't want you to, interpolate this or filter it, just boom, boom, right? And that is that very harsh sample rate reduction. What about bit depth? I'm going to double click, set that back to normal. So there's bit reduction. So reduction is essentially, we're keeping the sample rate, but we're just reducing the resolution, right? And there's already some stuff going on there, which is cool, but, oh wait, no, let's go down. The resolution, right? So if we look at this in the vertical sense, the distance between this sample and this sample is a value. The distance between this sample and this sample is a slightly bigger value, and different waveforms, different parts of your track, different audio in general will have different distances between these samples, and right? So every sample that is taken, the value is, this part in terms of an amplitude. It can be a number, and let's say it's between -1 and +1, right, in a float. So it can be anything in there. But what if we kind of reduce the resolution of that float, right? So say if this point here, let's just say that it landed on 0.57093 right? We could actually be like, okay, let's just, boom, round this up, 7.1. Or round this up or down to 7, or round this up to 6, right? Just simple kind of truncation of the number, and we are going to see this very shortly. So let us turn off that, go back to linear here. Right? I'm going to reduce the bit depth. Right now it's 16. Whoa. Right? Look at that truncation at 7 bits. Right? It's just rounding it off, right? So there's a, I guess you call it a, actually I'm going to go a little bit slower. Right? All right, that makes a little bit more sense there. So these are the values that it rounds off to. We still have, I guess we'd say, for the sake of argument, over time, we would have 44.1K. We still have that, but the resolution is only 7 bits, right? And it's a different sound, right? So let me just kind of give you a lesson here. So right now, I guarantee that you and I, we are both using 16 bits of audio resolution. That is the resolution of the amplitude we can hold of a signal. And we can check and confirm this because, you know, if we go into options and then we go into, say, audio, you don't necessarily see a bit. We hear sample in out, right? Right? Sample out from live to our interface or our sound card, or, you know, within live. I'm looking at 44.1 here. Where's the bit depth? That is actually in the recording, because live has a 64-bit summing engine built in. It has a very wide dynamic range within the track that's super high quality. We go to record warp launch, we see that the recording bit depth is 24, and that is reserved just for recording audio. So there's a number of options here. We got 16 bits, and that works well, and that is the standard for, I guess, like iTunes, distributors, things like that. 24 is typically what you would record in, right? You would record in 24, right? So 16 bits is a standard. For, you know, 24 bits, that would be for a recording because it gives you more resolution in terms of amplitude. So you can have your volume down a little bit, giving you more headroom, and you'd still maintain the resolution of that. Say if you had this signal very quiet, you record it very quiet at 16 bits, and then you wanted to stretch it out like an image, stretch it nice and big, you would not have the resolution that you would have as if you kind of started out with an image that big. So 24 bits will allow you to, you know, record things at a volume that is gentle, and, you know, you can have dynamic range, things getting loud, things getting soft. And then you would be able to kind of bring it up in volume and still have, you know, the noise floor well below. 32 bits, now this is very controversial. 32 bits is apparently pointless because, and it could actually be detrimental because you'd just be recording more noise. Typically it's 24-bit, and if you are recording something, you always record in 24-bit to give yourself that headroom and that flexibility. And then you will dither and kind of truncate that down to 16 bits. Again, with dithering, very important, and that removes something called quantization noise, which is what we are applying to this signal here. And that's basically what you need to work with. 32 bits is essentially marketing. Live supports it because some sound card manufacturers support it, and it as some very reputable research and people that I respect have said that no, 32-bit is actually pointless and you're just recording more noise. It can actually have the inverse effect. It doesn't make it sound better. 24 bits records well into the noise floor anyway. 32 bits is just exacerbating that issue. And, no one's ever ruined a recording by, recording 24 bits instead of 32. So keep that in mind, right? Don't believe in the hype or the marketing. We should always strive for the highest quality, but yeah, like when you are working with effects within Ableton, right? You're not worried about the bit depth of those plugins. You are worried about the sample rate because aliasing is far more detrimental. And a lot of plugins have something called oversampling, which is very important. It will sample at a frequency twice of what your DAW is, and then downsample it, and that way you get higher quality. And we'll get into that later. Oversampling is very useful for. We'll get into that. Don't worry about it. But you'll notice with the bit rate reduction here, which is what we're doing, we're introducing quantization noise or errors, right? Where it kind of just the point might be around here, but it's saying no, just round it up. It's just rounding up and rounding down. That's essentially all it's doing. And you'll notice that it kind of acts like a transfer function. Like it's the same no matter where we put it, where the note we press. Right? Right? And this can add some really cool noise. Oh, look at that. That would be the noise floor caused by the bit rate reduction and the quantization noise. And, this is something you need to take into account. And, it's very obvious here, but this is what can occur when you dither, when you are effectively setting the bit rate reduction when you export from 32 or 24 to 16. So just keep that in mind. This, believe it or not, is desirable in some cases, right? Because it'll make a sound more dirty. And, you look at it, right? It's adding some interesting harmonics because it's kind of squarifying that, as opposed to the downsample, right? Where it's not so much affecting the audio like in a timely manner. Like it kind of changes as you move up and down the pitch. Right? So you can get some chiptune going in there. And of course, you can use these in combinations, right? So bit reduction and downsampling. Right? So we can have the bitrate reduction at a juicy 7. And then we can have some downsampling to add a little bit of higher frequency stuff. Right? I'm going to show you the usability of these kinds of effects. Redux is a very simple effect, but when used in conjunction with, EQ and some filtering, you get a really awesome sound. So let's just dirty up some stuff here. Okay, good enough. So let's drop that in that track there. I effectively just dropped in a drum rack, audio effects, go to Redux. So what this can do is this can change and enhance the higher frequencies. So check this out. Right, that low end is still coming through and being recreated, but the higher end stuff has a little bit of that grittiness to it. Right, and this works pretty well for, let's say, hi-hats. I'll show you what that does. I just created a new track there. Let's go. No. I want a closed hi-hat. All right. And I'll just solo that. I use Control-D to duplicate that over. I'll just double-click to close that. Go back into audio effects. And let's get some sample rate reduction there. I'll go soft. Right, and a famous kind of, I guess, trick to kind of make hi-hats a little bit more gentle is to apply a little bit of downsampling. Right, and you know, I used a little bit there just to illustrate the point, but a little bit of EQ, you can do a bunch of cool stuff. Right, get a completely different vibe out of that, and that's just with a simple downsampling application. Right, let's go into this right here, and let's just solo this kick here. So with the bit reduction, there's a number of specifications you can look at online that will kind of give you a brief overview of the bit depth and sample rate that a lot of these old school machines kind of operated on. And they operate like, you know, state of the art was like 12, right? And, you know, tape was around 8. Right, so we're getting some of that truncation stuff there. Go 9. And how they would combat this is they would actually apply some filtering. So they would actually filter that off. And this is EQ8. I'm just going to do a sharp roll off here. Right, just as an example. Right, and that snare sounds pretty cool. Right, and I think that's more of a better example of making something a little bit dirty. So I'd probably just apply that to the snare, and I'll demonstrate that. I'll actually just drag this into the snare cell here. I'll just drag that there, and then kaboom. Right, so the kick's not being affected, but that snare is being person handled, I suppose. Right, and when you get down to like only having kind of one bit, it's essentially on or off. And I apologize, that's freaking loud. Let's just stick to 8. Right, so we're adjusting kind of the timbre of that snare. And all sorts of fun stuff. Right, so that is essentially the Redux effect. And again, bit reduction, bit depth reduction, like the like the resolution, what it can see when it takes a sample, and how many samples per second it's achieving. So think of this as kind of like a ratio kind of movement here. So, all sorts of stuff. That was the Redux. There's a number of different kinds of advanced Redux plugins, and I've done videos on those. They implement the jitter and filtering that are present in these machines, but this will get you a lot of the way there. You get a really cool effect. So I hope you guys enjoyed that. Hope you learned stuff. Take care and have a good one.